Hello, and welcome back to the Scary Stories channel. Tonight's scary story is about a paranormal investigation that gone horribly wrong. So without further ado, let's begin. I'm a 32-year-old man. It is broad daylight as I write this story because what I'm about to share haunts me to this day. I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share with others. Maybe others have had similar experiences. If so, please let me know. To tell this story and give it justice, I have to tell you about an experience that happened 3 years prior. Buckle up. This will be a long story, but definitely not a boring one. My name is Joshua, but I will change the names to protect the privacy of others involved in this story. I live in Arkansas, and this was in the late 2003 autumn, right before it started getting really cold. My wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugar Loaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet them at Sugar Loaf. My friend, we will call him Bob, wanted to take my wife and I around some, quote, paranormal places in the Sugar Loaf area. We got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white 1996 Ford F-150. Bob was driving an early 1980s white Celebrity. It was a royal piece of junk. It was late dusk and becoming dark. We all climbed into Bob's car. He took us around the area, first to an old abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling around, it was a 2-hour waste of time. He then took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted. Again, another bust. Then an old church that was run down and supposed to be haunted. Once again, major yawn. At this point, it was getting close to midnight. My wife and I were getting pretty bored, and I spoke up to Bob saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees during the daylight. I asked him what it was. He asked me if I saw a house, any type of light pole, or anything in the picture. I replied no. He took the picture back and said that was because there wasn't anything out there. There are no power lines either. About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. After that, it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. There was nothing to light the night except for the full moon above and a clear, starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us all to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field, and wooded hillside was. He looked at his cell phone. Neither of our phones had any signal. This was 2003 and this area had no cell towers. He looked at his phone and said it was 11:57. He told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete darkness, I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes went by. Nothing has changed. Then, at the stroke of midnight, a small light began flickering on the middle of the hillside. A chill ran down my back as my wife, Bob, his girlfriend, and myself watched as this small light, which looked like an old kerosene lantern, began to move. It swayed back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes. I finally spoke up and asked what was the story with this. Bob said he didn't know, but locals had told him that every night at midnight, this lantern will light up and sway back and forth through the woods. When the sun comes up, it disappears. Nobody knew the story behind the strange light. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything could scare me, let alone hurt me. Since there was no houses around, I yelled, "We see you! Wow, you are so scary with your little lantern." Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth. It was moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. It began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was, because within seconds, we were in the car flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent until Bob spoke up saying, "Crap, I forgot to get gas earlier." The only store around is closed. If we decided to go back out, it would be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning. He had less than a quarter of a tank. I said okay. A few minutes later, we arrived back at Sugar Loaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks and dropped my tailgate. We sat and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him that she was hungry. He told her we had brought some snacks, but she needed a meal. The local store was closed. He asked if we could take my truck to the next town to get some food because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us there. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key and nothing happened. My truck was completely dead. No indicators, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. The battery was shot. This was strange. After that night, we all had a gut-wrenching, uneasy feeling. We got out of the truck and popped the hood. We pulled Bob's car around to the front of my truck and attempted to jump-start it. This was when things got even stranger than before. As soon as we got the cables connected to both batteries, his girlfriend started his car. Immediately, the cables between the connectors started to smoke, and in a flash of fire, they burned up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob ran and turned his car off, and we took the clamps off of our batteries. We looked at each other in the eerie moon and starlit night. We both got a bad feeling at that exact same time. We suddenly realized we had been hearing distant noise in the lake, and it was getting louder. It was a boat motor. By now the night air had moved in, and it was starting to get really cold. We all bundled up. We were standing on land, but somebody was out on a boat? After midnight? It had to be chilly with the wind hitting them. From the sound of this motor, it was going pretty fast, but we didn't see anything. That is until the boat was about 50 yards away, and a very bright spotlight came on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I told the woman to get in his car and lock the doors. I reached into the bed of my truck and gave Bob a tire tool. I picked up another one. We were standing in front of the vehicles with the hoods up on both. As the boat pulled up to the dock, two heavily bearded men in their 30s and 40s stepped out of the boat. They walked up to us. It's hard to give an accurate description of them as their spotlight was still pointed at us. It covered the men in an eerie shadow while blinding Bob and I. They looked at us and our vehicles. One of them glanced toward the women and then back at us and let out a small chuckle. "You fellers got some sort of car trouble?" one asked as he lit up a cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I replied softly. The guy with the cigarette sniffed the air. He looked down between Bob and I's feet and sees the still smoking ashes of what used to be the jumper cable. "Looks like it was more than your wussy jumper cables could handle. Y'all need some help? We got some tools on the boat that I think can fix you guys right up." Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning says, "Fix 'em right up." I am speechless at this moment. As the two men walk back to their boat, we hear what sounded like chains rattling around. We tried to make out what they were doing, but the spotlight was so blinding we could barely see. Bob looked at me without saying a word, and we both jumped in his car and drove the hell out of there. For the next few hours, we drove to a populated area. There wasn't many in the rural area we were in. When we found one, we all sat in the car mostly quiet, looking around in all directions. We were paranoid, thinking at any time those men would find us. Bob would turn his lights on every now and then, thinking he had seen movement in the dark. After a while, the women fell asleep. Bob and I talked about how weird this whole ordeal had been. He laughed and said, "I told you it would be a scary night. I didn't know that it would be this scary, though." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't the main thing freaking me out. We never saw the men again, thankfully. The morning was upon us, and it was about 20 minutes until the sunrise. Bob asked if I wanted to go see if the lantern really disappeared at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas. He said, "Yeah, the local store opens up in about an hour, so we should be fine." I told him in that case, sure. We woke the women up and drove back to the hillside. We got there about 4 minutes until sunrise. We still saw the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looked at me. I smiled back and do the motion for zipping my lips. We all watched in amazement as the lantern slowly faded into nothing. After that, we get back in the car and drove back to the lake. Finally, we felt a sense of safety again. We got there was no sign of the boat. The hood of my truck was still up and the doors were still locked. I told Bob I was going to try to start it one more time. I couldn't believe it, but the truck started right up with no hesitation. We all went our separate ways and counted our blessings. We swore we would never do another paranormal investigation anywhere near this area again. All things fade with time. Fear and common sense are no exception. 3 years later, Bob calls me. He said he had a proposition for me. He told me that he has a group of people who go out and do seances in haunted places. He asked me if I would be willing to film their sessions for their records. They would pay me well for my services. I have always loved the paranormal. Sugar Loaf hasn't changed that. I still have fascination when it comes to the unknown, so I told him I would love to film for them. I really had no interest in joining the group, but this sounded okay. Of course, my next question was, when are we getting started? When he answered, I got a terrible feeling. Call it intuition. I wished so much that I had trusted it and told him that I had changed my mind. Of course I ignored it. Remember that lantern light out near Sugar Loaf, he asked? As if there was a way I could forget. Yeah, I stammered. Why do you ask? I told my group the story and they want to do a ritual there. We want to see if we can contact the spirit, find out why it is there, and what it wants. I don't know, man, I said. Oh, come on, Josh. Trust me, you will be safe. I will pay you $250 just to sit there and film it. I was about to become a father and money was really tight. Diapers, formula, and baby furniture cost a small fortune. It was my wife and I's first child, so she was going crazy spending money preparing for the new addition to our family. Because we had more expenses than income, I accepted Bob's offer. A week later, I found myself back in the same beat-up celebrity Bob was driving 3 years ago. This time there were 5 of us. Bob, 2 other guys, and 1 girl. Besides Bob, the rest were complete strangers to me. They all were dressed very gothic and had pentagram pendants around their necks. It was almost midnight when we arrived. The 4 of them sat in a tight circle. I was behind them recording everything as they started chanting. As the group chanted, Bob lit a huge candle and placed it in the center of them. He opened a book. He started reciting words from it, and then he looked at his phone. He told his group to be quiet and look up at the hill. I faced the camera up the hill, and at the stroke of midnight, the lantern appeared. One member of the group blurts out, "Cool!" I rolled my eyes. Then Bob asked the group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turned my back to the light and began to film the group. They began chanting again, and Bob read more from the book. They started asking questions and hoped the spirit would respond. The wind picked up, and the candle blew out. He told everyone to hold on as he told me to cut the camera for a minute. I did as he requested and stopped recording. Bob tried to relight the candle, but nobody's lighter would work. It was then I started hearing a rustling coming from behind me. I jumped up, leaving the camera on the ground. I spun around to see what was making the sound. The group was too preoccupied with their candle to notice. As I spun around, I was blinded by the brightest light I have ever seen. It appeared to be a lantern right in front of me, but as soon as it appeared, it vanished. It was gone. It couldn't have been the lantern from the hillside. It would have had to traveled almost a mile in less than a minute. I look around for the lantern on the hillside, but it was gone. It was only 12:15. The light had always remained visible until sunrise. Just then, the wind quit blowing. I heard Bob's lighter finally flick and light up. I muttered, guys, did you see that?" They all turned around and asked what I was talking about. Before I could answer them, we were all stopped dead in our tracks by distant laughter coming from everywhere around us. It was very distant, but sounded like hundreds, if not thousands, of children laughing. The thought of that sound still haunts me to this day. I screamed, "We need to get the hell out of here!" but everyone was already running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candle behind. I ran after them and jumped in the car as the laughter was becoming deafening. We hauled ass out of there and drove about a mile up the road. We pulled over as Bob was in no condition to drive. We were all freaking out. We got out of the car asking each other if we really just heard that. I told Bob that I was sorry, but I left his camera behind. He said he didn't care and there's no way he's going back for it. We were just starting to settle down a bit when all of a sudden, we hear the laughter again in the distance. It was quiet at first, but slowly got closer and louder, until once again it was becoming deafening. We jumped back in the car and sped away. We drove about 4 miles before the sound of laughter was no longer heard. Bob's friend was in the passenger seat with his phone, just waiting for a signal. Finally, he had a signal. He handed the phone to Bob. He called a friend who was well-versed and educated in the occult. He described our story to her in great detail. She believed it was the children of Hecate, or something like that. I had no clue what she was talking about. It sounded more like a guess to me than anything. While Bob was on the phone, we all got a chill at the same time. A loud snapping noise came from the front end of the car and stopped it dead in its tracks. Bob tried everything, but the car simply wouldn't move. We later discovered that a tie rod had snapped. The girl Bob was talking to on the phone wasn't very far away, so she agreed to come pick us all up. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke. After about 3 minutes, we saw headlights coming down the road toward us. We knew it was too soon to be Bob's friend, but we thought maybe we could get a ride from a local. We got out of the car and stood in front waiting on the vehicle to hopefully stop. The vehicle did not stop. It was an old beat-up truck. It slowed down and inside were 2 men in their 30s to 40s with huge beards. They stared at us and sped up after passing us. I looked at Bob, and before I could speak, he said, "The guy's in the boat." Before I could respond, headlights appeared in the other direction. It was the same guys in the truck. They passed by us again slowly, staring at us on the side of the road. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell and get here ASAP. 4 or 5 minutes pass, and we see headlights coming. Finally, a sense of relief. We got our stuff ready thinking it was Bob's friend. Then his phone rang. It was the lady who was coming to get us. She told Bob she had taken a wrong turn and will be an extra 10 to 15 more minutes. Bob hung up the phone. We watched in horror as the same truck slowly passed us again. This time there was only one man in the truck. He slowed down to a crawl and said, "Looks like you fellers could use some help." Then he sped up and drove off. It was verified. We were definitely dealing with the guys from the boat, but where the hell did the other guy go? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat? All of a sudden, the laughter starts up again. 2 sets of headlights appear from the east, and another set of headlights appear from the west. The set from the west ended up being Bob's friend. She rolled the window down and yelled, "Get in!" The other 2 vehicles shut off their headlights as we got into the car. She said, "Oh my God, you weren't kidding about the laughing kids." We told her about the boat guys, and she turned the car around. Immediately, the other 2 sets of headlights came back on. This time, though, it was their high beams. She floored it. For about a mile, the 2 vehicles stay right on our bumper. Finally, they turn off onto a side road. We heard the laughter for another 2 miles before it faded away for the last time. To this day, I have no explanation as to what happened, what the laughing children were, what the lantern was, why the laughing followed us, nor if the boatmen were connected to all of this somehow. So, are you interested in investigating the paranormal? Did you check your vehicle out well before heading out to the unknown? Do you realize all of the dangers involved? Is there a light outside your window right now? Perhaps a lantern from a spirit? Listen, do you hear anything? As always, good night, sleep tight from the Scary Stories channel.